Okay, good morning. So it's my pleasure to introduce Fei-Fei Li to you. Fei-Fei is a professor in Stanford. She has done a lot of interesting work, particularly on high-level visual recognition. But since a lot of you are familiar with her work, I'm not going to waste time describing some of her accomplishments. But instead, I'll just mention one thing that probably none of you are aware of. Before she started her PhD at Caltech, she actually spent a year in Tibet doing medicine research.
Oh.
Fei-Fei.
All right. I was nervous for a moment.
What else?
I know what else. All right. It's always so nice to come to Google. I know so more of you at Google than I know people at Stanford. So it feels like I'm with friends. So really, this I hope this is a casual talk and be interactive and ask me questions. I throw together this talk. I named it large-scale image classification, but really I'm at Google, so Chuck said he's gonna multiply everything by a large number in his head to make it large scale.
0.5?
And actually, I was talking to a group of you, and I just want to say that. You know how great authors, when they write novels, they start the novel and they don't know where the novel is going. A great novel is when you start it, you let the characters take their own life. And these two projects, ImageNet and ObjectBank, is how I feel about it. I'm not saying this is a great novel. I just feel that I want to share with you the beginning of the story, but I don't know where this is going. I'm super excited by how these two projects can take its own life. And if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear about it. So, really, I don't need to tell you what is vision. We actually did have a philosophizing session earlier this morning, before my coffee. But there is two components of vision. You take the real world, the visual world. There is a part that's forming pictures, that's capturing and imaging and so on. But there is an even deeper part that is understanding pictures or videos. You take the pixel world you have captured, and how do you make sense of it? And our brain is doing that every single second. In fact, that more than 50% of the neurons, cortical neurons in our brain is involved in visual processing. It's by far the largest component of the sensory system in our brain. And for me, and then those of us working in computer vision, we're trying to, do similar tasks as the brain is doing. And personally, like Thomas said, I'm particularly interested in making sense at the high level, which is really about telling stories. If I see a picture like this, how do I, tell a nice story that tells you what are the objects inside, what is the scenery, what is the layout of the scene, what's happening, what's the activity, and maybe down the road, the emotion, the intention, the purpose, the goal, and so on. So that's kind of the overarching interest I have for doing vision. And I'm not claiming this is all of vision. There are other parts of vision, such as people looking at, properties of images, properties of objects. There are people looking at more fundamental geometry and grouping and segmentation issues. But high-level vision is what I'm interested in. Just a little bit of a roadmap of where computer vision has come from in this space of telling stories or high-level vision. So roughly, this is my own opinion as well, so take it with a grain of salt. Roughly speaking, the high-level vision story involves three key tasks or functionalities: object recognition, scene recognition, and event and activity recognition. Of course, they're not isolated, as you know, but I'm just doing this to make things simpler. And for each of them, we have different levels of tasks, and I try to make them in a vertical line, so going from relatively lower level tasks to relatively higher level tasks. For example, some of you who are old enough like me knows that for the past the bulk of the research that was happening in the 90s or even earlier to early 2000 is more concentrated in the lower level part of this chart, trying to figure out what are the important features, interest points, feature descriptors. Everybody knows the word SIFT that comes from intensive research here. People are looking at tracking the videos, some of the grouping and segmentation work, understanding shape and texture, and a little bit, this is what my PhD was in, a little bit of object recognition. Now, today, really the bulk of computer vision research has moved a little bit upward, and it's focused here. We're trying to do a lot of work in solving the fundamental object recognition problem, solving the fundamental scene image recognition problem, and understanding activities and actions. This is actually not enough work has been happening here. And my own prediction is that vision is both perception and cognition. We are still very busy trying to solve the perception problem. We're far away from solving it, but eventually perception is going to meet cognition. And once we're starting to meet cognition, we're even going to go up higher to think about intention and goals, functionality and roles and things like that. But that's just a speculation. So in just a little bit of an advertisement for Stanford Vision Lab. So we have been very active in several areas of research, and I'm going to tell each one of you these papers today. No, just kidding. I'm not going to. But just to give you a fuller picture, we've been very much interested in understanding object recognition. We've been trying to work on scene recognition, both from segmentation point of view all the way to scene interpretation and understanding. And personally, I'm also very enamored by verbs and activities these days. So that's kind of an overall picture. We're not going to go through each of them. So today here, I just want to share with you two very recent work. In fact, I'm mostly going to share with you the ObjectBank work. But to just lay some ground for where ObjectBank come from, and as well as to just, I haven't given a talk at Google for so long, I feel like I should tell you a little bit about ImageNet, even though some of you know ImageNet better than I do now. So that's the roadmap. We'll look at both of these work. I'll be relatively quick about ImageNet. So before I talk about ImageNet, let me give some credits to my fantastic collaborators. Professor Kylie from Princeton University. When I wanted to do ImageNet 4 years ago, I was not able, just the thought just daunts me so much that it was Kai who told me, do it, I have a big cluster. And without his support, I would never be able to venture into this project. And Alex Burke is also collaborating with us, and these are the two very bold graduate students who actually signed up for this. Okay, so here's a small roadmap for ImageNet. I'll briefly describe what ImageNet is, and then tell you a little bit of using ImageNet to benchmark today's state-of-the-art computer vision algorithm. And again, this is just the beginning. I'd love to hear what you think or explore possible collaborations if you're interested. Datasets and computer vision has always been intimately related. In fact, one way of looking at the discipline of computer vision is it's driven by datasets. So without dataset, computer vision can hardly advance. Here is a tribute to some of the classic datasets. Some of you during your PhD have worked on some of these. Without these datasets, we wouldn't be making progress as we are today. We look at these datasets today and laugh at the small scale, the lack of variability, and so on, but they have played critical roles. For example, in object recognition, I don't know, anybody remember COIL? Some of you remember COIL? We look at it today, we just laugh at it, but it was really critical for the first wave of object recognition papers. Also, also UIUC cars. That's another very classic data set. I didn't dare to put Caltech 101 here, so but also some of the other data set like face recognition, ferret faces, CMU faces. Other than recognition, some of you working in other areas of computer vision probably recognize Middlebury stereo data sets, very classic texture data set, and so on. Again, in the morning philosophizing session, I was chatting with you guys. Personally, I tell my students as well, to solve the problem of vision, you've got to understand your data. It's not just a feature vector to me, and it might be to some other people, but so having good data set is one of the most critical thing in computer vision research. So in object recognition research, let me just zoom into this part of the history a little more. We started with in early object recognition research, we started with a data set basically that comes from Caltech, and it's a binary data set. Have one class, motorbike, and some random images crawled from the web called things. And that already got us pretty far in object recognition. And then people have been working on this Caltech 4 data set for quite a while. Again, this is many of you have worked on this probably in your PhD, if you still remember. Personally, part of my own thesis was coming up with the so-called large-scale data set at that time is the Caltech 101. By now, it really is an outdated data set in object recognition, but there is a push towards large scale. What got really exciting is the last few years there was a lot of effort in recognizing the problem that if you really want to solve object or image recognition, you've got to respect the true scale of this problem. And what is the true scale? I think human scale is even different from Google scale, but at least we know there are tens of thousands of different objects, and probably from Google's point of view, you have millions of different categories. So there were some effort in putting together data sets that's trying to be that towards that scale. One of the nice data set is called Tiny Image. Some of you probably are working on that. Tiny Image is a great data set, but it's quite tailored towards a specific problem of trying to have very limited memory, very limited resolution, and how do you solve a problem within that scope. And while Tiny Image data set was going on, at Princeton, we were thinking about a different problem. We were thinking about coming up with the data set that is full resolution, and it's not a data set that reflects the statistics of the web, but rather an ontology that tabulates the visual knowledge in human understanding. So that was the philosophy of ImageNet and where it started. So ImageNet in a glance. Today, you can browse ImageNet online and download it for free. And if you go to our homepage, at least that's how it looked like last night, we have rolled out 17,000 classes of objects and scenes. And where do these 17,000 classes come from? They come from WordNet. So ImageNet is built upon the backbone of WordNet. I assume most of you here have heard of WordNet? Yeah. Okay, cool. In total, ImageNet has more than 12 million images spread over 17,000 sensets. We try to make it as even as possible, given the resource on the web. And every one of the images in the ImageNet is human verified multiple times for the correctness. We cannot claim 100% correct, but this is as good as it gets for us. And for each of the concept in ImageNet, you can actually browse. For example, I just randomly type the word tiger cub, and ImageNet has 1,444 images of tiger cub, and we tell you that if we rank it, we made a ranking based on the popularity on a British corpus, document corpus, and tell you this has a popularity percentile of roughly 50%. You can also download a subset of the categories have features for you to download if you never want to process it yourself. We have processed some features for you. We're also rolling out bounding boxes for each of the objects in the ImageNet dataset. You can also browse. You can also look at this particular concept and see where it exists in the WordNet ontology, and look at and browse the parent and children of this synset yourself. So, any questions you want to know? Yes.
So what was the rationale to align the label, the classes with WordNet, which is a sort of semantic? It's not a visual hierarchy. It's basically a semantic natural language processing.
That's a very good question. Okay? There are two rationales. The shallower answer to that is that where else can I find a huge lexicon database that can give me labels other than WordNet? I don't know. There might be other. For example, at Google, you guys have, say, a list of query words, but we don't. So that's one point. Another deeper answer to this is, where do language come from? Where does language? Why do certain objects have words? It's because that they exist in the world, and humans through evolution need a label for that. So in a way, the language labels reflect the visual world.
But then there are things like functional categories, chairs, and so on, which are not visually homogeneous.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So that's part of the research. We don't know how. I'll show you a confusion table that actually taps into that question. But a functional category, are they completely non-visual? Are they partially visual? We don't know yet. It's part of research.
So what happens in case a noun doesn't have?
It doesn't have meaning. Like it doesn't have visual.
The visual
for example,
meaning, yeah.
Hatred.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. So in constructing ImageNet, we have for now limited ourselves in physical entity subtree. Okay, so we can go deeper into this. There are 80,000 concrete and countable nouns in WordNet. Of the 80,000, we have done an estimation about probably 30,000 of them are imageable. And there are two ways of deciding whether they're imageable. One way is by filtering by researchers like us. We don't get into these very fluffy nouns. That's one way. The other one is we have decided to take out the disease subtree. For example, we just don't want to get images for disease or bacteria. So we've taken out a little bit of that. But that's not a huge portion. Then what we do is we give to Amazon Mechanical Turk, where I'm going to show, and we find out there are synsets that people can never agree on how to label these images. And we take them out as well, because if people don't agree, we don't know what to do with them. So okay, so that's an overview of ImageNet.
One quick question here. So the other issue is that why you feel it's reasonable, because image is still, it's pretty different from the text information. Why you think it's reasonable to use the WordNet, the semantic structure to organize the images in the database? I mean, image may have their own hierarchy. I mean, what's the...
Yeah, that's a great question. We haven't come up with our own hierarchy, So we have to rely on something. That's why we start with WordNet. Do we think WordNet fully reflect the visual hierarchy? I don't think so. Do we think it's related? Absolutely. Because this is, the relationship between language and vision is very close, even in human vision. So, yeah, so, we have things like animals. We've mapped out all animal world above bacteria. We have things like indoor geologic formations. We have lots of sports activities, materials and fabric, instrumentation such as tools, appliances, plants, flowers, and so on. So basically, I've tested people. Think of a noun and search in ImageNet. In general, the first few nouns people think of, as long as you're not trying to break ImageNet, it exists there. So, okay, so very quickly, how did we construct ImageNet? I'm going to just be very brief about this. So really there are only two steps. One is that for each of the synset, so each of the category, we collect lots and lots of candidates from the internet, and then we ask people to clean it. That's it. So every synset, we go through these two steps. And collecting from the internet is you have many ways of doing it. Again, we don't work at Google, so we have to find a way to do it. We do, query search. We expand the query to get more things. We do multiple languages. We do multiple search engines, and we do lots of parallel downloading. So basically, for each category, we come up with about 10 to 20,000 candidate images. That's the number we are operating with. I know that you guys have more, but that's where we stopped. Okay, so the second step is to verify images by humans, and so what do we? So I was doing this computation. Let's say so how large ImageNet eventually will be? I was thinking back 3 years ago. It'll be, about 40,000 synsets, and we have, let's say, about 10,000 candidate images humans need to go through for each of the synset. We should at least have 3 people to look at each image, right? Otherwise, you cannot verify it very well. And if I do that, let's just say a person looks at 2 images per second. And don't eat and sleep and so on. And if we do this computation to construct the entire ImageNet, it'll take 19 human years. So I asked my graduate student, do you want to do this? And then he said, no, I need to graduate. So that was impossible. So thank God we discovered Amazon Mechanical Turk. I didn't even discover it. My graduate student got so desperate, he discovered it. And because of that, we're able to cut this number almost in any way we want, depending on how much money we pay. And we have this so-called parallel human computing. And that was the secret sauce for being able to have ImageNet today, is because of Amazon Mechanical Turk. So roughly what do we do in Amazon Mechanical Turk? You can, if you have free time, you can go do the task for us too. So if you go to a page for ImageNet task, this is a typical page. Oh, what is this? Okay. So this is a syntax called delta, and it gives you the explanation. It's a low triangular area of blah, 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 blah. And then these are the candidate images. We give you about 300 candidate images as a tracker, and then you look at them and you say, okay, you click on the ones you think are good images that contains, what does good mean? We give you instruction that click on the photos that contain the objects or depict the concept. And then these are the good ones. It gets deposited over here. And if you think you make a mistake, you click again and it goes back. So that's the basic UI for doing this task. And for 300 images, you get paid 4 cents. We can talk about why people want to do this, and are we exploiting chained prisoners from third world? I can guarantee you we're not. So, and then there are some things you have to do. People are not vicious, but they do anything to get money. So, for example, this is just to provide people. Some people might not know what delta is. And then not only we have provided definition, we give them both Google, thank you, and Wikipedia links to show them, they can just go and study it for that 4 cents. And then there are also, for example, some words are ambiguous. You see that word keyboard. How do I know it's a music instrument or a computer keyboard or some board that actually had keys? So you want to make sure, because if you Google that word keyboard, I don't know how good it is now, you might get multiple meanings, multiple images. And how do you make sure people select the right one? We actually quiz them. It's not easy to get these 4 cents. You actually have to go through a quiz. So we show the word, and then we ask them to read the definition, and they click on I have read it, and then we ask them to actually click on the definition that they have read. So that ensures, and this definition comes from all the key, in this case, delta. In WordNet, delta has multiple meanings, and you can just list all of them. And they have to read it in order to select the right one. And after that, they can go into the visual task. So there are also feedback page. And also, another thing I can tell you guys, since you never have time to do this task anyway, is that we have planted images. We have some images we know the ground truth. So we make sure once you finish doing these 300 images, we compare your results with some of the planted images and make sure you're not cheating on us. So that's I don't know if you guys care about doing Amazon Mechanical Turk. That's actually really, really important.
And if I cheat, I get only 2 cents?
No, you don't get any money, and you email me and cry and say, I didn't mean to cheat. We got a lot of emails like that. Can I please get back this 4 cents? So, yeah, okay. Any other questions about how we collect this? Yeah, okay. So, all right, so that was a quick overview of how we got ImageNet. We said ImageNet is an ontology. Some of the properties of ImageNet, it is pretty high accuracy because we have done this human verification, and then we have sampled about 20 or 80 categories from all different depths of the WordNet tree, and gone through the independent verification and measured it against ImageNet and have obtained this precision. It's not perfect, but it's very, very high. We have looked at the diversity of the images. That's another thing we cared about. And then here's an example of comparing Caltech 101 versus ImageNet. One way to compare it, one quick way is just look at the average images and see if the average image, the grayer it is, the better it is. If you can see faint outlines, it probably means it's not diverse enough. We come up with some quantitative measure, but don't worry about that. So we also look at the distribution of ImageNet in terms of the images. And again, our philosophy is not to reflect the real-world statistics. Our philosophy is we want this to be an ontology. So in 2009, for example, we have more than 6,000 classes that have more than 500 images in ImageNet, whereas another fantastic dataset in computer vision, which is for another purpose, has only 85 classes that has more than 500 images, and only 200 classes that has more than 100 images, whereas we have almost 10,000 classes that has more than 100 images. So really, what we hoped is that ImageNet can be used as a benchmark, but it's not to reflect real-world statistics. Okay, so that was a quick overview of ImageNet, and just very quickly, the very obvious thing when we had ImageNet in our hands was to ask ourselves, now we have this large-scale data set. Let's see where computer vision is as a field in recognizing this large scale. Are we, how are we doing? So here's the answer. Let me explain to you what the answer is. So we're testing recognition accuracy against the number of categories. And the accuracy is measured by the average of the diagonal entries in the confusion table in the n-way categorization. And we have tested 4 state-of-the-art algorithms. You look at these 4, they are GIST representation, which is filter bank representation with nearest neighbor, bag of words representation. Do I need to explain bag of words here? Okay, everybody knows, right? Great. Bag of words representation with nearest neighbor, bag of words representation with linear SVM, and spatial pyramid representation with SVM. Do I need to explain spatial pyramid? So spatial pyramid is a bag of words on steroid, basically. It has some location information. So why do I call these 4 state-of-the-art? Why am I not using constellation models and pictorial structure? It's because only these, for our, how many nodes? 500 core or nodes computer cluster, we can only run these. I don't know if at Google, you guys, I would love to, see some of you testing even fancier models, but that scale is just impossible. So, okay, what's the punchline? The punchline is the best algorithm out of these 4 is spatial pyramid plus SVM, and a 10,000-way classification gives us about 7%.
So you trained 10,000 one versus rest SVMs?
Yes.
And each image was normalized to the same L2 norm, or they were not normalized?
We use spatial pyramid. Oh, you mean in the SVM? Is the vector normalized?
The input. So you have images from different illumination, different classes.
No,
so the energy of each image is different.
No,
right?
we use the bag of words representation. There is intrinsic normalization if you use SIFT representation, because SIFT cares about gradients, so we don't need to. I mean, the feature construction is a little more subtle, but consider this chart the state of the art. Whatever the best computer vision.
Sure, but the question is whether the L2 norm of each image is different.
The images are fairly similar size,
yeah,
right?
I would say the dynamic range is okay, but they're not identical for sure.
Okay.
So.
And why the choice of 10,000 one versus rest SVMs versus something more robust to that
computation? We don't have enough resource or time. So this takes 1 month to run for us. I mean, it's because we don't have a big cluster. So that's basically the punchline. Is it really sad? Well, it depends on how you look at it. So my graduate student look at it and thinks it's very sad. 7% is really bad. I looked at it and said, wow, there's 93% to go, lots of research. But the truth is, random chance is 1 over 10,000. So we're not that bad, right? So can this be used in real world? No, not yet. So to me, this is very exciting because of that.
What would be human performance on this specific test?
Very good question. What would be human performance? The answer is we don't know, and the question is, do we care? It's really a good question.
If it's less than 5%, then I would care.
That's not true, right? Because, for example, humans cannot fly. We still want to make airplanes. So it's true that we want to many of the simple tasks, for example, detecting this cup, we want to benchmark against human and make sure computer vision can do as well as human. But
It's
when we're
very
here,
different, this argument. I don't want to digress, but you're talking about a cognitive task where the labels were defined through a cognitive task. So, yes, human cannot fly and human cannot track a missile the way, a simple Canlu filter can do, right? But we're talking here about the cognitive task, right?
Maybe one thing that we'll explain is one image can have more than one label.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Because that makes a big difference in the
Yeah.
10,000 case.
very good question. We do deduplication within a path, but we don't do deduplication across paths. Let's say an image has a person and a chair. That image in the person path, which is what mammal and Homo sapien and whatever, will only appear once. But that image can appear in the chair path.
But even in that path, it makes sense for a human that it appears more than once. So some
Yeah,
errors
but
that
for
you actually
us-
record
no,
here
we
are not real
dedu-
error for humans.
Yeah, we deduplicate it along the path. So
But it creates artificial errors.
It does. How to measure exactly, nobody knows, because it's a hierarchy. Before that, no one had a hierarchy. So we might not be measuring the right
So
way.
typically, again, it's a bit of a digression, but if you look at problems in hierarchical classification in machine learning, there aren't that many, but there are a few well established. Then a tree gives rise to a unique distance, right, between two nodes, right? So typically, the natural loss for decision task is the tree distance that it
Yes.
induces, right?
We have it later. We'll show you. Yeah, exactly. And can we train with hierarchy is another very useful thing.
I think it's safe to say humans are going to do a lot better on this. I don't know the numbers, but
Depending on the humans. For sense, you mean.
So even that statement, one needs to be careful. I agree with you. It's safe to say humans can tell the difference of many classes, but humans might not be able to name it. So how do you even get that ground truth is a very tricky task. So
Have you tried using the backtrack to? Sorry, have you tried using track to get those labels? Because if you showed me one of those delta images,
Yeah.
there's absolutely no way I would tell you it's a delta.
well, if I have infinite amount of money, yes, I will. The trackers for 4 cents, the only thing they can do is yes or no.
Nice.
If you ask them to type a word, you probably have to pay 40 cents.
Before you kick in.
So humans might not be able to name them properly, but here you're doing training one versus all classifiers.
Right.
So each one is like a.
So you have to look at the
Exactly.
10,000 classes
Yeah.
and show that to the human and say which one is it.
Exactly.
Just reading them. will
But then
be
there's no
more than
typing. It's a multiple choice question, right?
But that's not yes or no. It's like yes, 10,000 times.
I guess I was also wondering, like, how much extra information do you think is necessary? Because, you have these 10,000 categories, which is kind of going to, like, almost, high-level perception. And, like, as humans, we have a lot of context. We have, sounds and things that are beyond just images.
Oh yeah. I totally agree with you. I don't even have an answer. Can humans do this, or how well can humans do? And I agree with you. Human use many other information. Human has years of learning as well. So I don't know.
I was just wondering if you add extra, say, for example, in addition to the images, you also add a little bit of text
Yeah.
associated with each
Yep.
category.
That
Could you
like
do a lot
totally
better?
improve. Yes, I think if you have a good way of extracting useful features and do the right learning, absolutely. Okay, so all right. Have you ever seen a 10,000 by 10,000 confusion table? I just thought that's cool. So this is it. It's so the diagonal gives you about 7%. Okay, to answer why WordNet hierarchy has it makes any sense. So the categories here are ordered according to the WordNet hierarchy. And the fact that we see structure that makes sense in this confusion table tells us there's a strong correlation between language and vision. We don't know who's causing who, but there's a correlation. Because if the confusion table is a lot more random, then we're saying, okay, this structure is not so correlated. But the fact that the animals have blocked confusion and artifacts have block confusion, and then you can zoom in and actually look at, bird, reptile, fish, and each one tells us the structure of word that actually reflects not 100%, but some of the visual world. So that's another cool thing we discovered. This is something that I actually don't have to preach to Google folks, but in computer vision, we're using this experiment to show people that depending on the granularity of the N-class classification, the performance varies wildly. So if you look at 100 or 200 categories of, say, vehicles, or 100 mushrooms, the performance is a lot lower than randomly sample 100 or 200 classes from ImageNet. And the reason we want to do this is to tell people that Caltech 101 and Caltech 256 is not necessarily the right benchmark if you really want to, be realistic about large-scale recognition. But here, you guys don't have that problem. So, hierarchy. How do you take into account of using hierarchy to do better, say, retrieval and so on? We're not claiming we have solved this. This is actually really a stupid way of just changing the cost of measuring error depending on the hierarchy. All we are saying in this paper is let's bring in hierarchical information, because mistaking a dog as a cat is not as bad as mistaking a dog as a microwave in most cases. And for example, if this is the query image, shipwreck, if you use no hierarchical information, you retrieve iceberg. Visually that makes sense, but the mistake is kind of large. The tree editing distance is 17. Whereas if you take into hierarchy into account, you retrieve cruise ship. Still wrong, but not as wrong in many cases.
That you trained it with that hierarchy, or not?
No, we measure the error with that hierarchy. We didn't train. In this case, now we're doing training, but in this case. So this is not, I'm not trying to advocate our method. I'm just trying to say that hierarchy is really important, and with ImageNet we're able to look at this problem now. Yes?
So I'm a little bit puzzled by this. I mean, perhaps it's obvious what I'm going to say, but I once got thrown out of class because I insisted that a whale was a kind of hippopotamus and not a kind of a shark. And if you're piloting a boat, a shipwreck and an iceberg are more similar than a cruise ship, because a cruise ship is going to get out of your way. So, yes, it's very semantic. It's very
I agree with you. Yeah,
dependent.
I'm not going to throw you out of this room. I totally agree with you from a cognitive task and purpose point of view. Maybe that mistake is, like, who is to say which mistake is better? Or I don't know. I'm not claiming.
Yeah, I just suspect that what's going on is that you've trained yourself on WordNet.
Yeah.
Or something.
Yeah, that's why we're getting that. Yeah, I agree. It's a little bit of a loopy argument. The only thing that I'm trying to save myself is that WordNet does reflect some well-accepted ontology or knowledge structure of human concepts, of semantics. Whether that's completely correct or not, I'm not claiming that. But based on that,
I think my point is just that I'm not sure that you're saying anything more than that there's structure visible in your amygdala.
Yeah, I'm not saying anything more. Yeah. Cool. All right, I think I should go on. Okay, so ImageNet, like I said, it's just the beginning. We're almost done constructing, and we're really excited by the possible research opportunity, driving towards large-scale recognition. One thing that came out of ImageNet, it's not direct, but it's an inspiration, is ObjectBank. And, I'm so excited by ObjectBank that, to me, if nothing else come out of ImageNet, I'm already very happy. So let me tell you what ObjectBank is. And I have to give credits for my collaborator, Professor Eric Shin at CMU, Dr. Drew at CMU, and my two students, Jali, who has interned here with Thomas, and Hao, who also had an intern in Google in China. So okay, so what is ObjectBank? Okay, let's just talk about vision tasks again. Image classification. What is image classification? Okay, let me show you this picture. One way to label it is a sailing event. You can label in other things, but at least that's one good label. What about this? That's sailing too. And they actually share similar image structure, proportion of water and sky is similar, the object looks similar. I mean, there's two boats missing, but, roughly okay. What about this? Still sailing. At least our human eyes look at it as sailing. But now color space is very different. Texture is very different. The shape of the boat is very different. The background is very different. The task is getting tougher. And what about this? Human eyes still look at it as sailing, but now the image structure between this and this is getting really different. But yet, we would, at least in certain scenarios, I'm not saying all tasks, we still would like to label all 4 of these images as sailing. So image classification, especially semantically meaningful image classification, is a really difficult task. And what have we been trying to do? We have been trying to use low-level features in computer vision to extract out image structure and some kind of machinery to achieve this task. And this whole thing is where the low-level feature representation is versus where the task is, that gap is called semantic gap. And research in computer vision or multimedia or whatever is really trying to close this semantic gap, because we have universally accepted these are some of the features we'll use: sift, surf, hog, color, texture, backup word, spatial pyramid, so on. So can we do better? One way of doing better is to have a really powerful machinery that closes the gap. But we're thinking about something different. And let me show you the thought experiment. Here's a thought experiment. So I have 8 classes of sports things. Bocce, tennis, no, not that, badminton, and sailing, and rowing, and all this. Let's do the best state-of-the-art computer vision algorithm. Spatial pyramid, representation and kernel. And the performance is 8-way classification is about 72%. Not that bad. But let's just do a thought experiment. Let me tell you, not only I see these images, I also know the identity of the objects. I also provide you information of the object information along with the scene. And I use both information, and what do I do? How do I do? I get 100%. So this is a thought experiment. No one can ever tell you this precisely. But it's telling you that these important object level information contributes a lot in differentiating scenes and to image classification. So that's what inspired ObjectBank. We want to somehow not only use low-level image information, but we want to bring out some of these high-level representation. And visually speaking, we want to close the semantic gap by actually bringing the representation higher, so that the task, our starting point, is closer to the high-level task compared to the low-level representation. So that's a little bit of philosophy. What exactly is ObjectBank is really simple. Here's ObjectBank. You have an image. Let's say somebody has given you a sailboat detector. And the person said, okay, I have a sailboat detector for you. I'm not saying this is a perfect sailboat detector, but take it. So we take the sailboat detector, we run it. We run it through the image, and then we get a response map. Okay? Now, forget about this. Now, what do I do with this response map? Well, I look at the response map and I look at it in several different ways of cutting it. I look at it as a bag of words. I look at it as a 2x2 bag of words. I look at it as a 4x4 bag of words, and I just collect the maximum value of each of these grid for the sailboat into each of these cells.
You're going too slow.
Yeah. So each of these cells collect a max response. And not only I look at sailboat detector in this scale, I look at it in another scale as well, because I don't know what sailboat, how big the sailboat is. So that's one. That's one thing. Now somebody says, "Oh, I have more than a sailboat. I actually have 200 other detectors. There's bear, there's water, there's trees, there's chair. Just take it." So I take all of them, and I run all the response map. I do exactly the same thing as I did with sailboat. I come up with this gigantic feature, and that's called ObjectBank. That's almost it. That is ObjectBank. Any questions here?
How many did you actually choose?
Right, good question. So actually, how many did I choose? For lips last year, we chose 200. And now you're going to say, where did this 200 come from? It comes from Zipf's law. Basically, we look at the 200 most popular objects or stuff, and then we cut it off. And one of these object detectors say, who gave you this object detector? We just pick the Felsen-Schwab object detector. Everybody picks that. We can pick any. We're agnostic to the object detectors. There are some design choices. Do we have to use these 3 levels? No, we chose it. How many scales? We happen to use 12 of them. Again, that's a design choice. What's the value to be put into each of the cell? We use max pooling, which is kind of a universally accepted. It has very nice properties, but if you want to do something fancy, that's fine as well. But these are the implementation details. And if I were Google, I can do a lot more than 200. So nobody stops us from using only 200. This is, but I have to say, there's some human vision study that tells us probably about 2,000 to 3,000 exaggerates. So that is the entire ObjectBank representation. So, any questions here? So why do I think ObjectBank representation makes any sense? Let me show you an anecdotal example. So there are 2 images. One is forest and one is urban streets. If I use a low-level feature, a very nice feature called filter bank or gist, they look like this. This is forest and this is street. Not so different. If I use another very nice feature called spatial pyramid, this is forest, this is mountain. Street. Not very different. If I use ObjectBank, it's really hard to visualize that gigantic vector. So I'm just showing you the response map of each of the object detectors. And without telling you how we're going to use ObjectBank, you already see there's a lot bigger differences.
What were the detectors trained on?
They're trained on images.
Yes, but
Are they the same image?
are they the same as the ObjectBank
No.
descriptors?
No. Wait, hold on. The object ObjectBank descriptors are these. Okay, let me be more specific. For now, our detectors are trained on our ImageNet images.
These 2 images were not in the
Oh
set
no,
of trained
these 2 are
images.
from Label Me, I think. Yeah.
So ObjectBank has no overlap with ImageNet.
Yes, it does. It's not these 2 images.
ObjectBank is a representation.
No, the
It's not-
detectors,
That's a complete overlap.
detectors are not trained on the ImageNet. Is that correct?
Computers
The
are-
detectors are trained on ImageNet,
That's why you shouldn't
plus
use
Label Me. But when we do any testing,
Yeah, you
we
separate these.
deduplicate.
Oh, so you
okay.
so you have the representation of the training set as well,
Yes.
but you're not using it.
Yeah, yeah,
So you do apply it to something.
yeah. So okay, so this is ObjectBank. This is it for ObjectBank. It's really, really simple.
How big is
How
how big
is
does that
it?
work out to be then? What's the length of the vector?
Okay, good question. 40,000 dimensions.
40,000?
Dimensions. Okay, let me speed up because I think I'm.
Yeah, you're right.
Sorry, I think I'm out of time. Should I stop? 5 more minutes. Okay, let me start talking fast. Okay, some proof of concept. Let's take another. Just trying to show you the power of ObjectBank. This is what possible data set we come up with. Label me. Again, deduplicated so that the training and testing don't overlap. These are some of the nice low-level features. This is average percent correctness. This is ObjectBank. Here is another data set, MIT endorsing 67 classes. These are the low-level features. This is state-of-the-art, and this is ObjectBank. Again, ObjectBank is just run on linear SVM. We didn't use any of the nice fancy machinery. And in fact, this state-of-the-art is even supervised with lots of labels. ObjectBank didn't have that. Another data set, the sports data set, again, these are the low-level features. These are the state-of-the-art ObjectBank with linear SVM. So it's a really powerful universal representation. The ObjectBank was not designed for any of these data sets. In fact, we just run it. We didn't really tune any parameters, and that's what we get. And let me just skip this. These are more experiments on Caltech 256. Again, ObjectBank is a lot higher than any other. Okay, so let me answer Kevin's question. So how large is ObjectBank? For 200 detectors, we have about, the dimensionality is about 44,000. And you can imagine for 2,000, you can just add a 0 there. So it's a high dimensional vector. It's over complete, and it's highly redundant. And that's part of the power. But if we can have a way to actually to simplify this feature, and one beauty is that by simplification, we can actually extract directly meaningful interpretation of the images. This is what we mean. So to combat this problem of curse of dimensionality, we used a really, really stupid algorithm. We do a classification based on logistic regression, but instead of using this full-length feature, we add a regularizer. We actually added 2 regularizers. One is a group lasso regularizer. The other one is just a simple L2 norm. Actually, the group lasso is the L2 norm plus a simple feature sparsification regularizer. What does this do to the logistic regression? It basically, while it's doing classification, it simultaneously picks out feature dimensions that are useful for this task. And the beauty of ObjectBank representation is because it's a high-level representation, when you're pulling out these features, they already have meaning. Imagine if you're doing a Battle of Words code book and you pull out a couple of features. You have no idea what that means. At best, you can say it's an edge in this orientation. But you cannot say this is actually water at this scale in this spatial location. But ObjectBank can give you that.
What was the group structure you used?
Just objects.
Object. So
yeah,
an object is used on that at all.
Yeah, yeah. So we're grouped by objects. So that's one thing that really makes me love ObjectBank is that while we can do all these high-level tasks, but when you look into the features and pull out the relevant dimension, you immediately automatically give you interpretable semantic meaning of the image. And here is an example. And for example, if you're looking at the beach scene, and you're looking at the weights that are learned by the logistic regression. And you look at the high weights that they are sky, water, sand. They're exactly what you wanted. That's the object detector. And the same thing goes to the mountain class. If you look at the high weights, sky, mountain, tree, rock, cloud, that's another.
Sky is higher than mountain for mountain.
Yeah, interesting, huh? So, I think I'm gonna skip this. So basically, I think that's it. I want to present to you this new representation called ObjectBank, which is it's very discriminative, very rich, and can be used universally for high-level image classification tasks. I can imagine if you have, bigger computers, this feature can be even more richer, and there are also ways to sparsify it if you care about extracting meaning out of it. So just some acknowledgement for the students who have been involved in this, and thank you.